Arizona Territory, 1877. The summer sun bore down with an unforgiving intensity that could only be found in the unforgiving deserts of the Southwest. Willow Bennett crouched by the creek that cut through her father's modest ranch, her slender fingers working methodically to scrub the week's laundry against the washboard. At 22, she possessed a beauty that seemed out of place in this harsh landscape. Golden blonde hair cascading down her back in waves, bright blue eyes that held both determination and a quiet sadness. She paused, wiping her brow with the back of her hand, taking in the beauty of the valley her father had claimed 5 years prior. The ranch wasn't much, a small cabin, a corral, and some cattle, but it was theirs. After her mother's passing from fever 2 winters ago, it had been just Willow and her father, George Bennett, battling the elements and the constant threat of raiders to forge their place in this territory. The frontier is no place for a heart, her father often told her. Out here, you survive by staying hard and trusting no one but your own. These words had become Willow's mantra, her shield against the world. She had seen how her mother's gentle spirit had been crushed by the brutality of frontier life, and Willow was determined not to follow the same path. She believed love was a luxury that had no place in the territories, a dangerous distraction that could get you killed. What Willow wanted was simple: to help her father build the ranch into something sustainable, something that could eventually be sold for enough money to move back east to civilization. What she needed, though she would never admit it, was to fill the growing emptiness that had taken root in her chest, a loneliness that seemed to expand with each passing season. As she finished the laundry and gathered the damp clothes into her basket, the distant sound of gunfire echoed through the valley. Willow froze, counting the shots, too many to be a hunter, too sporadic to be soldiers. Raiders, perhaps, or another skirmish between settlers and the native tribes whose lands were being steadily encroached upon. She hurried back to the cabin, where her father was already preparing his rifle. "Stay inside," he commanded, his weathered face set in grim lines. "I'm going to check the North Ridge. If I'm not back by sundown, you'll be back," Willow interrupted firmly. She'd learned that expecting the worst only invited it. After her father departed, Willow paced the cabin, her fingers nervously twisting her mother's silver locket that hung around her neck. As dusk began to settle over the valley and her father had still not returned, she made a decision that would change the course of her life. Taking her father's spare Colt revolver from its hiding place, she saddled her horse and rode toward the North Ridge. The twilight painted the landscape in shades of purple and gold as Willow cautiously followed the trail up the ridge. It was there, in a shallow ravine partially hidden by scrub brush, that she found him, an Apache warrior, barely conscious, blood seeping from a wound in his side. His eyes fluttered open at her approach, dark and fierce despite his weakened state. He was younger than she had expected, perhaps 25, with strong, angular features and long black hair. Not the monster of campfire tales, but a man, wounded and vulnerable. Willow raised her revolver instinctively, years of frontier warnings echoing in her mind. The Apache's eyes held hers steadily, without fear or pleading. In that moment, something shifted within her, a crack in the armor of her beliefs. This was the moment her father's teachings should have guided her hand. Apaches had raided settlements throughout the territory. They were the enemy according to every story told around settler campfires. Yet she couldn't pull the trigger. Instead, Willow made a decision that defied everything she had been taught about survival on the frontier. She lowered her weapon. "I must have lost my mind," she whispered to herself as she dismounted and cautiously approached the wounded man. There was no sign of others, neither Apache warriors nor whoever had shot him. Just a lone, injured man whose life was seeping into the Arizona dust. When she knelt beside him, he tensed, clearly expecting a killing blow. Instead, Willow examined his wound. The bullet had entered his side but appeared to have missed vital organs. He would die without help, but with proper care, he might survive. "I'm going to help you," she said, knowing he probably couldn't understand her words, but hoping her tone conveyed her intentions. "But if you try to harm me..." She let her hand rest on the revolver at her side. The Apache's gaze held hers for a long moment before he gave a slight nod. With considerable effort, Willow managed to help him onto her horse. She led them not back to her father's ranch. She wasn't that reckless. but to an abandoned line shack about a mile east that hunters sometimes used during the winter months. The shack was little more than 4 walls and a roof, with a small stone fireplace and a rickety cot, but it would serve. After settling the wounded man on the cot, Willow set about tending his injury, using skills her mother had taught her. "My name is Willow," she said as she cleaned his wound, more to fill the silence than expecting response. "Willow Bennett." To her surprise, he spoke, his voice strained but clear. "Ishkay." He tapped his chest weakly. "Apache." Willow nodded, somewhat startled that he spoke English. "Ishkay, I need to remove the bullet." What followed was a grueling hour as Willow extracted the bullet and cleaned and bandaged the wound. Ishkay remained stoic throughout, barely making a sound, even when she knew the pain must have been excruciating. When she finished, exhaustion claimed him, and he fell into a fitful sleep. Willow sat by the small fire she had built, wondering what madness had possessed her. Her father would return to find her gone. He would be frantic. And here she was, nursing an Apache warrior, the very people settlers feared most in the territory. Yet something about leaving Ishkay to die had seemed more wrong than helping him. It was this thought that kept her in the shack through the night, checking his fever and changing his bandages, caught in a strange limbo between everything she had been taught and something deeper she couldn't yet name. Dawn found Willow dozing by the fire when a rough hand shook her awake. She startled, reaching for her revolver, only to find herself staring into her father's furious face. "What in God's name are you doing?" he demanded, his voice low and dangerous as he glanced at the sleeping Apache. "He was wounded," Willow said simply, rising to stand between her father and Ishkay. "I couldn't leave him to die." "He's Apache," George Bennett spat. "They've killed dozens of settlers this past year alone. And how many of his people have we killed?" Willow countered, surprised at her own boldness. "He's a man, father. Wounded and alone. He's dangerous," her father insisted. "Once he's healed, what's to stop him from slitting our throats while we sleep?" Ishkay stirred on the cot, his dark eyes taking in the scene before him. He spoke, his voice stronger than the previous night. "I owe life debt. Apache honor. No harm to woman who saves." George Bennett's hand tightened on his rifle. "You speak English. Learned at mission. Before soldiers came." Ishkay's voice held no emotion, but Willow sensed a history of pain behind the simple statement. A tense silence filled the small shack. Finally, George lowered his rifle slightly. 3 days, he said grimly. "You have 3 days to get him well enough to leave. Then he goes, or I'll fetch the soldiers from Fort Bowie myself." After her father left, Willow turned to Ishkay, whose face remained impassive. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "No sorry," he replied. "Your father right to fear. My people, your people, much blood between." Willow changed his bandages in silence, contemplating his words. "Why were you alone?" she finally asked. "Where is your tribe?" Ishkay's expression darkened. "I scout. Soldiers attack, camped 2 days ago. Women, children." He closed his eyes briefly. "I search for survivors. Found soldiers instead." Willow's hands stilled. She had heard rumors of army campaigns against the Apache, but the newspapers painted them as necessary measures against savage raiders. Hearing the pain in Ishkay's voice made those clinical reports suddenly, horribly real. "I'm sorry," she said again inadequately. The next 3 days passed in a strange rhythm. Willow would return to the ranch during daylight hours to tend to her chores and allay her father's suspicions, then sneak back to the line shack in the evenings with food and fresh bandages. Ishkay's strength returned surprisingly quickly, and by the 3rd day, he was able to stand and move around the small space. During these days, a tentative understanding grew between them. Ishkay taught her words in his language. She told him about her mother and her life before the territories. Neither acknowledged the deadline approaching, but it hung over their interactions like a shadow. On the evening of the 3rd day, Willow arrived at the shack to find Ishkay standing outside, gazing at the sunset. He had fashioned a walking stick from a branch and wore the clean shirt she had brought him the day before. "You are leaving," she said, unsurprised but feeling an unexpected pang of loss. He nodded. "Must find my people. Those who survived." Willow handed him the package of food she had brought. "This will help for a few days, at least." Ishkay accepted the package but held her gaze. "Why did you save me, Willow Bennett?" The question caught her off guard. She had asked herself the same thing many times over the past days, and had no clear answer. I don't know, she admitted. It seemed wrong not to. He studied her face as if memorizing it. In my language, your name would be Tu Bil Nagahi, water flowing gently. It suits you. Before she could respond, he turned and began walking away, his movements still stiff but determined. Willow watched until his silhouette disappeared into the gathering dusk, convinced she would never see him again. 2 weeks passed. Life at the Bennett ranch returned to its familiar routine, but Willow found herself distracted, often gazing toward the north ridge where she had found Ishkay. Her father noticed her preoccupation but attributed it to the lingering effects of her foolishness, as he called her rescue of the Apache. It was during a supply run to the small settlement of Copper Springs that the outside world intruded violently on their careful existence. Willow was loading supplies into their wagon when a commotion drew her attention to the main street. A group of rough-looking men had surrounded something, or someone, in the center of the street. As Willow moved closer, she saw a young Apache woman on her knees, clutching a small bundle to her chest. A child, barely visible within the wrappings, found her hiding in Miller's barn, one of the men announced to the growing crowd. Probably scouting for a raiding party. I say we make an example, another suggested darkly. Send a message to those savages. The young woman's face remained stoic, but her arms tightened protectively around her child. Something in her quiet dignity reminded Willow powerfully of Ishkay. Without considering the consequences, Willow pushed through the crowd. Stop this, she demanded, positioning herself between the men and the Apache woman. She's just a mother with a child. What kind of men threaten a baby? Step aside, girl, the largest of the men warned. This ain't your concern. I'm making it my concern, Willow replied, her heart pounding but her voice steady. The standoff might have ended badly if George Bennett hadn't arrived, his rifle in hand. My daughter's right, he said, surprising Willow completely. There's no honor in harming women and children, no matter their race. The confrontation dissolved, though not without muttered threats and dark looks. Willow helped the young woman to her feet and led her to their wagon. The Apache woman, still clutching her infant, followed without resistance, her eyes wary but grateful. Where can we take her? Willow asked her father quietly as they left the settlement behind. George Bennett sighed heavily. Home for now. We'll figure something out after. The Apache woman, who identified herself as Nasha, stayed with them that night. She spoke little English, but managed to communicate that she had become separated from her people during an army attack. Her husband was dead, killed while trying to help their band escape. As Willow prepared a bed for Nasha and her baby, a pounding at the door startled them all. George Bennett approached cautiously, rifle ready, while Willow ushered Nasha into the back room. When her father opened the door, Willow was astonished to see Ishkay standing there, flanked by 2 older Apache men. Ishkay, she exclaimed, stepping forward before her father could raise his rifle. Willow Bennett, Ishkay acknowledged, his eyes finding hers instantly. He looked healthier, stronger than when she had last seen him, though there was a new scar visible at his temple. We seek woman and child. Saw your wagon leave settlement. She's here, Willow confirmed. She's safe. The reunion between Nasha and the Apache men was brief but emotional. The baby, a boy of perhaps 6 months, was passed around carefully, examined for harm, and pronounced healthy by the eldest of the men. She is sister of our chief, Ishkay explained to the Bennetts. We thought her dead with the others. George Bennett cleared his throat uncomfortably. You should all be gone by morning. The territorial militia patrols this area regularly. Ishkay nodded. We leave now. Safer to travel in darkness. As the other Apaches prepared to depart with Nasha, Ishkay approached Willow. Twice now, you saved my people, he said quietly. My debt grows. There is no debt between. Willow hesitated, unsure what word to use. Between friends. Something flickered in Ishkay's dark eyes. Friends, he repeated, as if testing the word. It is good word. Better than enemy. They left as silently as they had arrived, melting into the darkness beyond the ranch house. Willow stood in the doorway long after they had gone, feeling as though something important had just slipped through her fingers. You're playing a dangerous game, daughter, her father said when she finally closed the door. I don't know what you mean, Willow replied, though she did. I've seen how you look at that Apache. George's voice was gruff, but not angry. Some lines can't be crossed on the frontier. For your sake and his. Willow didn't answer, but that night, she dreamed of dark eyes and a voice speaking words in a language she was only beginning to understand. Spring turned to summer. The ranch prospered under the Bennett's care, but rumors of increasing tensions between settlers and Apaches filled every conversation in Copper Springs. The Army had established a new outpost just 20 miles south, and soldiers were a common sight on the roads. It was during this time that Willow began finding small tokens at the edge of their property. A beautifully crafted arrowhead, a pouch of rare healing herbs, a small carving of a horse. She knew who left them, though she never caught sight of him. Each gift she stored carefully in a box beneath her bed, treasures from a world she was forbidden to enter. One evening in late August, Willow was returning from checking the cattle in the north pasture when she spotted a figure waiting by the creek where she had done laundry months before. Even at a distance, she recognized Ishkay's silhouette. She approached cautiously, scanning the surroundings for others, either his people or potentially hostile settlers, but they appeared to be alone. "You shouldn't be here," she said when she reached him, though her heart raced with a contradictory joy at seeing him again. "Dangerous times," Ishkay agreed. "Army pushing all Apache bands north. Many deaths. Soon, no safe place for my people in this territory." "I'm sorry," Willow said, meaning it deeply. "Is there anything I can do?" Ishkay studied her face. "Why you help Apache? Your people hate mine." "My people," Willow repeated slowly. "I'm not sure who my people are anymore." The admission surprised her even as she spoke it. They sat by the creek as the sun began to set, talking in low voices. Ishkay told her of his childhood in the mountains to the north, of Apache traditions and beliefs. Willow spoke of her life before the territories, of books she had read and cities she had visited as a child. The gulf between their worlds seemed both vast and, somehow, bridgeable in these quiet conversations. As darkness fell and Ishkay prepared to leave, he hesitated. "I come again, if you permit." Willow knew she should refuse. Every meeting increased the danger to them both. Yet she found herself nodding. "I would like that." Throughout the autumn months, they met occasionally, always at dusk, always briefly, always at the creek, which began to feel like a place between worlds. Each time, Willow learned more about Ishkay's life and culture, and each time, the boundaries her father had warned about seemed less important than the connection growing between them. During one such meeting in early December, Ishkay arrived with tension evident in every line of his body. "What's wrong?" Willow asked immediately. "Army Colonel Richardson offers treaty. All Apache must surrender, live on reservation land near San Carlos." Ishkay's voice was tight with anger. "Not treaty, prison. Our people starve there, die from white man's diseases. And if you refuse, then we are hostile Indians. Can be shot on sight." His hands clenched into fists. "My band votes tomorrow. Chief listens to me as we're leader. My voice important." Willow felt cold fear spread through her. "What will you advise?" Ishkay met her eyes directly. "I come to ask what you think, Willow Bennett." The weight of his question stunned her. That he would seek her counsel on something so vital to his people's survival spoke of a trust she hadn't fully recognized until this moment. "I cannot tell you what is right for your people," she said carefully. "But I know there are good people among the settlers who would speak against injustice, if they knew. Perhaps surrender buys time to build those alliances." Ishkay considered her words. "Perhaps. Or perhaps it only makes easier for Army to eliminate us." He touched her hand briefly. "But I think on what you say." Before departing, he pressed something into her palm, a small pendant carved from shell, hanging on a leather cord. "Apache give this to one who holds their heart," he said simply, then disappeared into the darkness. Willow stood frozen, the pendant warm in her hand, the implication of his words washing over her like a wave. She had been taught to fear the Apache all her life, to see them as savages and enemies. Yet here she stood, her heart racing at the touch of an Apache warrior's hand, at words that crossed boundaries she had never imagined crossing. She returned to the ranch house in a daze, the pendant hidden in her pocket. Her father sat by the fire, reading a worn copy of the territorial newspaper. "Army's offering a new treaty to the remaining Apache bands," he commented without looking up. "About time this fighting ended." Willow said nothing, the weight of her secret suddenly unbearable. She knew what her father would say if he knew of her meetings with Ishkay, of the feelings that had taken root in her heart against all reason and propriety. That night, she lay awake, the shell pendant clutched in her hand, torn between worlds that seemed impossible to reconcile. The decision was taken from her hands a week later when a contingent of soldiers arrived at the Bennett ranch. Their leader, a Lieutenant Wade, informed them that all settlers in the area were being asked to report any Apache sightings immediately. Colonel Richardson believes most will accept the reservation offer, Wade explained, accepting the coffee Willow offered. But there's one band led by a young war chief that's been particularly troublesome. They've rejected the treaty outright. Which band? George Bennett asked, while Willow stood motionless, dreading the answer. They call themselves the People of the Mountain Spirits, led by a warrior named Ishkay. The lieutenant's casual mention of the name made Willow's blood run cold. He's rallied several smaller bands to his cause. Colonels put a price on his head, dead or alive. After the soldiers departed, Willow moved through her chores mechanically, her mind racing. She needed to warn Ishkay, but how? She had no way of contacting him. He always came to her. That evening, she rode out alone, ostensibly to check on a missing calf. Instead, she headed to the creek, praying that somehow, Ishkay would appear. The creek was deserted, the December twilight casting long shadows across the water. Willow waited until full darkness, but Ishkay did not come. With a heavy heart, she turned her horse toward home, only to find her path blocked by 3 mounted soldiers. "Miss Bennett," one of them called. "Lieutenant Wade sent us to escort you home. It's not safe to be out alone with hostile Apaches in the area." Trapped, Willow had no choice but to allow them to accompany her back to the ranch. As they rode, one of the soldiers, younger than the others, fell in beside her. "Begging your pardon, miss, but the lieutenant wanted me to ask if you've seen any sign of Apaches near your property recently," he said. "Particularly a warrior named Ishkay." "No," Willow replied, careful to keep her voice steady. "I haven't seen any Apaches." The soldier nodded, seemingly satisfied, but Willow noticed the other two exchanging glances. A chill that had nothing to do with the December air ran through her. The next morning, Willow woke to the sound of horses in the yard. Looking out her window, she saw Lieutenant Wade had returned, this time with a full dozen soldiers. She dressed hurriedly and joined her father outside. "Mr. Bennett," Wade began formally, "information has reached us that your daughter may have been in contact with the Apache renegade Ishkay." George Bennett's face hardened. "That's nonsense. My daughter knows better than to consort with savages. Nevertheless, we need to search your property." The lieutenant's tone made it clear this was not a request. If she's innocent, she has nothing to fear. Willow stood rigidly as soldiers fanned out across the ranch. One approached her father's barn, and she felt panic rise in her throat. The box beneath her bed, the gifts from Ishkay, would condemn her instantly if found. "Father," she began desperately, but it was too late. 2 soldiers emerged from the house, one holding the small wooden box. Lieutenant Wade opened it, examining the contents, the arrowhead, the herbs, the carving, and worst of all, the shell pendant. He held it up, his expression grim. "Do you know what this is, Miss Bennett? It's a courtship token, given by Apache warriors to their intended brides." He turned to George Bennett. "Your daughter has been meeting with Ishkay, sir, and unless I'm mistaken, their relationship goes far beyond friendly conversations." The look of betrayal and horror on her father's face cut Willow to the core. "Father, I can explain. You will come with us to Fort Bowie, Miss Bennett," Wade interrupted. "Colonel Richardson would like to speak with you about your friend." "On what charges?" George demanded, finding his voice at last. "No charges, yet," Wade replied coldly. "But aiding hostile Indians is considered treason. The penalty is hanging." Willow felt the ground shift beneath her feet. What had begun as compassion for a wounded man, then blossomed into something deeper, was now being called treason. The frontier had no place for such crossings of boundaries, just as her father had warned. "I'll come with you," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "But I've done nothing wrong." The ride to Fort Bowie was conducted in tense silence. Willow, flanked by soldiers, tried to catch her father's eye, but he rode ahead, his back rigid with anger or fear or both. Colonel Richardson proved to be a tall, austere man with cold eyes and a reputation for harsh tactics against the Apache. He received Willow in his office, the shell pendant lying on his desk between them like damning evidence. "Miss Bennett," he began without preamble, "I'll be direct. You have information I need. Tell me where I can find Ishkay and his band. And these indiscretions of yours can be overlooked." Willow stared at him, understanding dawning horribly. "You want me to betray him. That's why you brought me here." "I want you to be loyal to your own kind," Richardson corrected. "Ishkay is a murderer and an insurgent who has rejected the generous terms offered by the United States government. He will be dealt with one way or another. The question is whether you will be implicated in his crimes." "I don't know where he is," Willow said truthfully. "And if I did, I wouldn't tell you." Richardson studied her for a long moment. "I believe you care for this savage, Miss Bennett. A misplaced affection, but one I can use. You will write a letter to Ishkay, asking him to meet you. When he appears, my men will be waiting." "I won't do it," Willow said immediately. "Then you'll be charged with treason," Richardson replied calmly. "And your father's ranch will be confiscated as property used in crimes against the United States." The threat to her father struck Willow like a physical blow. She thought of all he had sacrificed to build their home, of his grief after her mother's death, of his efforts to give her a future. "You have until morning to decide," Richardson concluded. "Choose wisely, Miss Bennett." Confined to a small room at the fort, Willow paced through the night, torn between impossible choices. Betray Ishkay, saving herself and her father, but condemning the man she had come to love to certain death? Or refuse and face the hangman's noose, leaving her father alone and destitute? In the gray light of dawn, a soft tap at her window startled her from her anguished thoughts. Peering out, she gasped at the sight of Nazca's face. The Apache woman motioned for silence, then carefully worked the window latch open from outside. "Come," she whispered, her English broken but urgent. "Ishkay send me. Soldiers sleep." Heart pounding, Willow hesitated only briefly before climbing through the window. Nazca led her to where two horses waited in the shadows beyond the fort's perimeter. They rode hard under the cover of darkness, following game trails and dry creek beds where their tracks would be difficult to follow. Just as the sun began to rise, they reached a hidden canyon where a small band of Apache had made camp. Ishkay stepped forward as Willow dismounted, his face showing both relief and concern. "You should not have come for me," she said, even as she moved toward him instinctively. "They'll hunt you even harder now." "Could not leave you to soldiers," Ishkay replied simply. "Nazca here from Apache woman who work at fort. Tell what Richardson planned for you." Willow felt dizzy with the implications. "My father, safe for now. Richardson need him to lure you back." Ishkay's hand closed around hers. "But you not safe anywhere now. Not with your people, not with mine." The reality of her situation crashed over Willow. She had become a woman without a place, caught between worlds at war with each other. The false belief she had clung to for so long, that the frontier demanded isolation and hardness to survive, had led her to this moment of absolute vulnerability. "What do we do?" she asked, voicing the question that seemed to have no answer. Ishkay's eyes held hers. "We survive. Together. Find way to new place, maybe. Territory large." The idea was both terrifying and oddly liberating. To leave behind everything, to forge a path where none existed. It seemed impossible, yet looking at Ishkay, at his strength and determination, Willow found herself believing it might be possible. A commotion at the edge of the camp interrupted their conversation. A young Apache brave rode in at speed, calling out in his native tongue. Ishkay's expression darkened as he listened. "Soldiers coming," he translated grimly. "Many, with Apache scouts." The camp erupted into activity, families gathering their few possessions, warriors preparing weapons. Willow watched, feeling helpless and responsible all at once. "This is because of me," she said. "I've brought this down on your people." "No," Ishkay countered firmly. "This was always coming. Richardson want all Apache gone or dead. You just excuse he use." As the band prepared to flee deeper into the mountains, Ishkay pulled Willow aside. "You have choice now. Return to fort, say we force you. Maybe Richardson believe. Or stay with me. Become enemy to your people forever." It was the starkest articulation of her dilemma, a choice between worlds that could not be bridged, between identities that seemed mutually exclusive. Everything she had been raised to believe told her to return to the fort, to her father, to the safety of her own kind. Yet as she looked into Ishkay's eyes, Willow realized something fundamental had shifted within her. The frontier wasn't about isolation at all. It was about finding connection in the most unlikely places, about forging bonds strong enough to withstand the harshest conditions. "I stay with you," she said, the words feeling like both an ending and a beginning. The next weeks were a blur of constant movement. Ishkay's band, joined by several other Apache groups rejecting the reservation, stayed just ahead of the army's pursuit. They moved through territories Willow had never seen. High mountain passes, hidden valleys, ancient paths known only to the Apache. During this time, Willow learned to live as the Apache lived. Nasha taught her to find edible plants, to move silently through the forest, to read the signs of animals and weather. The other women, initially wary, gradually accepted her presence as Ishkay's woman. And Ishkay himself, in stolen moments between scouting and council meetings, taught her the deeper language of his people, the stories and beliefs that had sustained them for generations. In return, she shared her knowledge of the settlers, information that helped the band avoid patrols and find safe passage. Their love, forged in the crucible of shared danger, deepened into something neither had expected to find in this harsh world. At night, beneath stars that seemed to burn with unusual brightness, they spoke of dreams that seemed impossible, of a place where they might live in peace, of children who would carry both their bloodlines, of a future beyond the endless running. But reality intruded harshly in early February when one of Ishkay's scouts reported that George Bennett had been arrested by Colonel Richardson, charged with harboring Apache sympathizers. He was being held at Fort Bowie, awaiting trial. The news devastated Willow. Her choice to remain with Ishkay had cost her father his freedom, perhaps his life. The guilt threatened to overwhelm her, until Ishkay offered an unexpected solution. "I go to Fort," he said during a council meeting. "Trade myself for Bennett." The other Apache leaders objected vehemently. Ishkay was their war chief, their strategist. His capture would demoralize their people and embolden the army. "Must be another way," argued Gray Wolf, the eldest of the band's leaders. "There is," Willow said quietly, drawing all eyes to her. "I'll go. Richardson wants me as much as Ishkay. I'll offer myself in exchange for my father's freedom." "No." Ishkay's response was immediate and fierce. "Richardson not keep word. Take you. Keep father, still hunt me. Then we go together," Willow countered. "Not to surrender, but to free my father. At night, when the guard changes." The audacity of her suggestion silenced the council. Ishkay studied her face, seeing the determination there, and slowly nodded. Together, he agreed. But not alone. The plan they devised was dangerous, but not impossible. 3 of Ishkay's most trusted warriors would accompany them. They would approach Fort Bowie under cover of darkness, using Willow's knowledge of the layout to locate where her father was being held. The goal was to free him and escape before the alarm could be raised, a bold raid of the kind Apaches had conducted successfully for generations. What they didn't account for was betrayal. An Apache scout working for the army, having learned of their plan through tribal connections, alerted Colonel Richardson. When Willow, Ishkay, and their small party approached the fort 2 nights later, they found not the expected skeleton crew of night guards, but a full company of soldiers lying in wait. The ambush was sprung as they reached the outer perimeter. Gunfire erupted from the darkness, dropping one of their companions immediately. Ishkay pushed Willow behind him as bullets tore through the night air. "Run," he commanded, returning fire with his own rifle. "Back to mountains." But Willow couldn't move, frozen by the sight of her father being dragged into the open at gunpoint by Lieutenant Wade. George Bennett's face was bruised, his clothes dirty, but his eyes widened in horrified recognition when he saw his daughter. "Willow," he called hoarsely. "Get away from here." Richardson's voice cut through the chaos. "Surrender, Ishkay, or watch Bennett die first, then your woman." It was the moment that crystallized everything for Willow, the false division between her world and Ishkay's, the artificial boundaries created by fear and prejudice, the truth that love was not a liability on the frontier, but the only thing worth fighting for. She stepped forward into the open, ignoring Ishkay's attempt to pull her back. "Stop," she called out. "This ends now." Remarkably, the gunfire paused. In the sudden quiet, Willow's voice carried clearly. "My father is innocent. I chose to help Ishkay, To be with him. If that's treason, then I alone am guilty. Willow, no. Both her father and Ishkay protested simultaneously. Richardson stepped forward, his face illuminated by the fort's torches. A touching confession, Miss Bennett. But it changes nothing. Ishkay will hang, and so will you. And create martyrs? Willow challenged, surprising herself with her boldness. Stories that will spread throughout the territory, to Washington itself? Stories of how the great Colonel Richardson executed a settler's daughter for the crime of falling in love. She saw uncertainty flicker across Richardson's face and pressed her advantage. Let my father go. Let Ishkay's people move north beyond the territory boundary. In return, we will both surrender ourselves to your custody. Willow, Ishkay said urgently in her ear. This not the way. Trust me, she whispered back. Richardson considered her proposal, clearly calculating the political implications. Finally, he nodded. The old man goes free. The Apache band has 3 days to cross the northern boundary. After that, any found in the territory will be shot on sight. And us? Willow asked steadily. You'll be held for trial, Richardson said. The outcome is not negotiable. It was a desperate gamble, but Willow saw no other way to save both her father and Ishkay's people. She nodded her agreement. The next hours passed in a blur. George Bennett, released from custody, refused to leave without his daughter. Ishkay's remaining warriors slipped away to deliver news to their band. And Willow and Ishkay found themselves locked in separate cells at Fort Bowie, awaiting a trial whose verdict was predetermined. Alone in her cell that night, Willow finally allowed herself to weep, not for her own fate, but for the future that now seemed irrevocably lost. The dream of a life with Ishkay, of finding a place between worlds, had been just that, a dream. Dawn brought unexpected visitors. George Bennett, accompanied by a distinguished-looking man in an expensive Eastern suit, was escorted to Willow's cell by Lieutenant Wade. 5 minutes, Wade said curtly, unlocking the door. Willow's father embraced her fiercely. Willow, this is Judge Ian Morrison, Federal Circuit Judge for the territory. He's here to help. The judge nodded gravely. Miss Bennett, your father has told me a most extraordinary story. I'd like to hear your version of events. Willow glanced uncertainly at her father, who nodded encouragement. She took a deep breath and told the truth, all of it. Finding Ishkay wounded, nursing him back to health, their growing feelings for each other, the impossible choice she had faced. I love him, she concluded simply. I know that means nothing under territorial law, but it's the truth. Judge Morrison studied her thoughtfully. On the contrary, Miss Bennett, it means a great deal. The Constitution guarantees certain rights to all persons, even those the Army would prefer to classify as enemies. What are you saying? Willow asked, hope flickering faintly. I'm saying that Colonel Richardson has overstepped his authority. Military tribunals have no jurisdiction over civilians, and summary execution without trial is explicitly forbidden. The judge's expression was stern. I've already sent telegrams to Washington detailing these irregularities. George Bennett squeezed his daughter's hand. Judge Morrison believes he can have the charges against you dismissed, and he's agreed to hear Ishkay's case as well. A proper trial, not Richardson's kangaroo court. It was more than Willow had dared hope for, yet still precarious. Richardson won't just accept this. No, Morrison agreed. Which is why we must move quickly. The events of the next few days unfolded with dizzying speed. Judge Morrison, invoking federal authority, ordered both Willow and Ishkay transferred to the territorial court in Tucson. Richardson, faced with direct orders from his superiors in Washington, alerted by Morrison's telegrams, had no choice but to comply. The trial became a sensation, drawing attention throughout the territory and beyond. Morrison, determined to establish legal precedent, argued forcefully that Ishkay, as leader of a sovereign tribal band, was entitled to diplomatic considerations rather than criminal prosecution. Newspapers that had once demonized the Apache began publishing more nuanced accounts, including testimony from settlers who had been treated fairly by Ishkay's band, even helped during hard times. The narrative of inherent enmity between settlers and Apache began to crack under the weight of actual human stories. Through it all, Willow and Ishkay were kept apart, allowed only brief, supervised visits. Yet each time their eyes met across the courtroom, the connection between them seemed to strengthen rather than diminish. On the final day of testimony, Judge Morrison called an unexpected witness, Sarah Blackwell, a missionary who had taught at the same mission where Ishkay had learned English. Mr. Ishkay was one of our most promising students, she testified. Intelligent, compassionate, eager to find ways for his people to live in peace with settlers. It was only after the mission was destroyed in an unprovoked attack that he became the war chief the Army now portrays him as. Her testimony painted a picture not of an implacable enemy, but of a man forced into resistance by circumstances beyond his control, a narrative that resonated with many in the territory who had also faced hardship and difficult choices. When Judge Morrison finally delivered his verdict, the courtroom was packed to capacity. Richardson sat rigidly in the front row, his face a mask of controlled fury. This court finds that the military detention of Miss Willow Bennett was unlawful and without jurisdiction. All charges against her are hereby dismissed. Morrison paused, surveying the room. As for Ishkay of the Apache, this court recognizes his status as a diplomatic representative of a sovereign people. He cannot be tried for actions taken in defense of that people. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Morrison raised his hand for silence. However, the court also recognizes the legitimate security concerns of the territorial government. Therefore, I order that Ishkay and his band be granted safe passage to the northern reservation, where they will be provided with adequate land and supplies and protected from further military action. It wasn't perfect. The reservation still represented a loss of freedom, but it was far better than execution or imprisonment. And most importantly, it meant life, for Ishkay, for his people, and for the possibility of a future that included Willow. As the courtroom cleared, Willow finally reached Ishkay's side. They stood together in a small bubble of privacy amid the chaos, hands clasped, foreheads touching. "This not the end," Ishkay promised softly. "Just new beginning." Willow nodded, tears of relief and lingering fear mingling. "I'll come with you to the reservation." "Your father understands," she interrupted. "Better than I expected. He said love finds its way, even on the frontier." The journey north with Ishkay's band was arduous, but filled with a strange joy. Willow rode beside him as an equal, accepted now by his people as one of their own. George Bennett accompanied them part of the way, helping to ensure the Army honored Judge Morrison's ruling. Before turning back to his ranch, he embraced his daughter one last time. "Your mother would be proud," he said gruffly. "She always said the frontier needed more love, not more fighting." The reservation at Wind River was not the prison Richardson had intended for the Apache. Under Judge Morrison's orders, it provided good land, access to hunting grounds, and protection from further encroachment. Ishkay's leadership, focused now on rebuilding rather than war, helped his people adapt without surrendering their essential identity. And Willow, no longer caught between worlds, but building a bridge between them, found a purpose she had never imagined for herself. She established a school where both Apache and settler children could learn together, breaking down the barriers of misunderstanding one young mind at a time. Their wedding combined traditions from both cultures. Willow wore a dress her mother had packed away for this very occasion, along with the shell pendant Ishkay had given her months before. He wore traditional Apache ceremonial attire, but stood proudly beside George Bennett, who had traveled north to give his blessing. Under a vast Wyoming sky, with mountains as witnesses and two cultures in attendance, they spoke vows in both English and Apache. Judge Morrison, who had journeyed from Tucson for the occasion, pronounced them husband and wife according to territorial law, while the Apache medicine man blessed their union according to traditions far older. That night, as they sat before the fire in the small cabin they had built at the edge of the reservation, close enough for Ishkay to fulfill his leadership duties but separate enough for privacy, Willow reflected on the journey that had brought them here. "When I found you wounded that day," she said softly, "I thought I was just saving a life. I never imagined I was finding my own." Ishkay's hand covered hers, his touch still sending the same thrill through her as it had by the creek so many months ago. Apache believes some souls meant to find each other, across any distance, any barrier. "Do you think that's true for us?" Willow asked, leaning against his shoulder. Ishkay smiled, rare and beautiful. "No, it is true. The woman who nursed wounded Apache back to health. The warrior who found his heart when he thought it lost. Our story already told in stars before we born. Outside, The night was filled with the sounds of a living land, whined through pine trees, distant wolf calls, the murmur of the creek that ran beside their home. Inside, the fire cast golden light across two faces from different worlds who had found, against all odds and expectations, that love could indeed tame the wild frontier, not by conquering it, but by embracing its fundamental truth that survival depends not on isolation, but on connection. And in that understanding, both Willow and Ishkay had found not just each other, but a home that existed not in any particular place, but in the space they created together, a space where love proved stronger than the artificial boundaries of the frontier, stronger even than the weight of history itself.